you've heard the legend. Medieval husbands, paranoid and jealous, would lock their wives in iron before marching off to war. The so-called chastity belt, a metal cage for the body, was supposedly the ultimate guarantee of fidelity. It sounds like a horror story, but what if I told you it was never real? The chastity belt has become one of the most infamous symbols of the Middle Ages, often shown in films, books, and museum exhibits. According to the myth, men forced their wives to wear these iron devices to prevent adultery, especially while they were away on crusade. The image is so powerful it has endured for centuries, but the truth is very different. The very first mention of a chastity belt comes not from a church or a courtroom, but from a manuscript written in 1405 called Bellefortis by Conrad Kieser. This book was a catalogue of war machines and fantastical inventions, and tucked inside was a drawing of what looks like an iron pair of underwear. But historians believe this was never meant to be taken seriously. It was satire, one of many absurd devices Kaiser sketched. Later, during the Renaissance, the idea resurfaced in art and literature, but always in a joking way. Satirical prints from the 16th century often showed wives in belts while their husbands looked foolish, sometimes with donkey ears, while a lover in the corner held a spare key. It was comedy, not reality, and that is the problem. There's simply no evidence that chastity belts were ever used in medieval Europe. No church records, no court trials, no sermons, and no medical texts mention them. Not a single medieval law or religious authority required them. If they had truly been common, we would expect countless references. Instead, we find silence. And even on a practical level, the idea collapses. Wearing metal strapped tightly against bare skin for weeks or months would cause horrific wounds, infections, and suffering. The body itself rejects the myth. So how did the chastity belt story survive? The answer lies in the centuries that followed. In the 18th and 19th centuries, a fascination with the bizarre and grotesque led collectors and museums to display supposed medieval chastity belts. But most of these were either misidentified anti-masturbation devices from the Victorian era or outright forgeries. During this period, the myth thrived because it fit the narrative of the so-called Dark Ages, a time portrayed as brutal, superstitious, and barbaric compared to modern society. The chastity belt became less about history and more about entertainment. In the 19th century, folks created metal and leather devices to prevent fearing illness. These were not about adultery or crusading nights, but about Victorian medical anxieties. And in the modern world, chastity belts exist too, but in a very different context, as consensual devices in BDSM communities, where their meaning is erotic rather than oppressive. The truth is, the medieval chastity belt was never a widespread tool of control. It was a story, a satire, and later a Victorian invention that we mistook for medieval fact. What survives is not evidence of iron cages around women's bodies, but of how myths can outlive reality. The chastity belt wasn't about love, and it wasn't even about fidelity. It was about fear, our fear of the past, and our need to see it as darker than it really was. In the end, the belt is not history, but a reminder of how easily we can mistake legend for truth.